Hello everyone. Today I'm going to show you how I tie a size 14 Hendrickson in the Comparadun style. When we're done it should look like this or something like that. And you may learn some new techniques the way I do this, and if you do, that's great. I hope you use them in your time. First thing you need to do is find some good deer hair for the wing. And the deer hair needs to look like this. It needs to have that little crinkle in it, and it needs to be hollow, and it needs to flare out when it's tied on the hook. I'm going to cut some off of that hank that I just showed you, and I'm going to put it into this hair stacker after I combed out the underfur. I'm going to tap it in that hair stacker so that the tips all align. And you can see how they're aligned, and there's one long one. I'll pull that out. And then when I take those tips out, I'm going to position them above the shank of the hook, and I'm going to try to measure that wing to be about the length of the shank of the hook, or slightly longer. And my first wrap is going to go completely around the wing itself, the deer hair, up above the hook, and then the second one goes around and around the shank, and I pull down right where I want that wing to be located. Now, this is key. I'm going to use some very snug wraps here. You can see I'm almost shaking that hook as I go through. And I've got 4 or 5 good wraps right in this same spot. And I'm never losing thread tension here. I'm going to stroke some of the wing back, and I'm going to bring it up and down and through. And again, you can see how hard I'm pulling on that. And I'm going up and down and through. And I'm going to bring that wing up in probably 3 or 4 pieces. And get it up, and I'm keeping that thread pressure on there, and now I'm going to make 4 or 5 wraps right there. And now that all that thread pressure that I created coming through that wing, I don't have to worry about it because I've locked it in, and I can sort of let go of this. So the next thing we want to do is separate that wing from the part that we're going to trim. I would call them the butt sections behind the wing. So I'm going to pull that forward, the wing, a little bit. And then I'm going to make another couple wraps right. I'm going to bring the thread from in front of the wing to behind the wing and make 2 or 3 more good wraps right there just to sort of gather everything together. And now we have to trim those butt sections. And I found that this is the technique that I like, and it works the best for me. And if you haven't used this, you might want to try it. You can use a single-edged razor blade, or you can get one of these tools for 49 cents at a paint store or a hardware store. And lay this down at an angle, and sort of just by holding it there and lifting those butt sections into the blade, it trims them off at a real nice angle. And when you're done, you don't have the big bump at all behind that wing. Now I know this takes practice. I'm making it look fairly simple, but if you want a slender body on your mayflies, this is the best way to do it that I've found. Once I've trimmed off any of the other pieces, and I have that, now I have that taper there, I'm going to wind my thread through those cut butt sections. And I usually put a little bit of super glue on my thread when I do this part. I didn't do it right now, but I think it's a good idea. Just put a little bit of super glue on and wind it right into those butt sections, and those will be locked in forever. I have a nice little taper I've built up here, and you can see that I don't have that unsightly bump that a lot of the flies will have when you're tying on a deer hair wing. So now my next step is to tie on my tail section. And what I'm going to use for this is micro-fibbets. And these are clear micro-fibbets. They take a color with a Pantone pen or a Sharpie marker very well. So I'm going to tie these on, and I want these to be the length of the shank of the hook. I really am not concerned. I don't want them too long. They stick out better, and they'll support that fly better the shorter they are. So I'm going to make these the length of the shank of the hook, and I'm canting them to the side. And I'm making 2 loose wraps, and then I'm going to bring that up on top. And now I'm going to hold those tail sections and wind over them so they stay right up on the shank. I'm winding right on top of them. And then once they start to go around that bend, I'm going to take 1 wrap of my thread right underneath them and make like a jam knot. And then wrap over them and wrap over the butt sections of those micro-fibbets. And then I'll trim those so that they stop right at the base of that wing. You can do a quill body the same way. If I was going to do a quill, I would have a nice smooth transition here, and I would soak my quills and I would tie it on now and wrap it up. But anyway, what I'm going to do now is splay these tails, and I'm using the scissor to do it so you can see better. But basically, you take your thumbnail and push up on them, and you'll be able to divide them easily into 2 equal pairs of 3. I like on a size 14. I like to have 3 on each side. And once I get 3 to each side, you're going to say, how am I going to keep them out that way? Well, I'm going to show you a technique that I like, and I'm going to take a separate piece of thread that matches the body color. It doesn't matter what size thread. And I'm going to pass that underneath the hook and get it around that bend, and then bring it to the rear. And as I pull it up, one's going to go to one side, one's going to go to the other side. It's going to force those tails out to a 45 or more degree angle. And just drop your thread over those the thread, and wind rearward towards those tails. And as you do, it's going to tighten those even more and splay those tails out. Now those tails have to be, I like them flared out as much as possible because they are a balance point on this fly. That in the wing keeps them floating perfectly upright. But once I'm done with that, I'm going to trim off the rest, and then I'll wind my thread up a little to the midsection, and I'll get ready to apply my dubbing. Now we've got a nice smooth body, and I want to keep this body slender, so I'm putting on a tacky wax that I've had for years. And then I'm going to take my dubbing, and this is what I like, the red brown. And I'm just going to take out a bunch, and I'm going to just touch that thread. It's called touch dubbing. Whatever stays on that thread, I'm happy. I don't want a big bulky hunk of dubbing on there so it looks like a cigar. I want this to compress down to a very, very, very thin noodle type of dubbing. So as I wind and squeeze my fingers together, I'm going to compress that down so that it's just about a little bit thicker than my thread itself. I did not dub right up to the end, and I'm going to use open wraps to get my thread back to the tail. And then where my dubbing starts coming around, I'm going to wind up one right in front of the other, keeping a nice slender body abdomen section. And as I come up to right behind the wing, I'll slow down a little bit, retighten my dubbing. I'm going to take 1 wrap, and now I have room for 1 more wrap, but I'm not going to fill that yet. I'm going to pull my wing up, and because I have thin dubbing, I can wrap in front and then wrap back towards the wing and jam those thread wraps with the dubbing right under the wing. Now I'll fill that gap behind that I have. We're trying to fill the gap on the underside of the hook by doing this too, by winding forward and back on an angle like that. Otherwise, if I didn't do that and if I just went forward, I'd have a gap on the bottom. So I'm not quite happy with the body yet. I like the abdomen section, so I'm going to add a little bit more dubbing. And again, I'm just touching that thread with the wax on it, and it's pulling the dubbing fibers right out of my fingers. And I'll compress those, and again, they're so thin and fine that when I wind those backward into that wing, it's going to compress against the wraps that are behind the wing and force it to stand upright. I'm really compressing those right in there, and if I had it too fat, I wouldn't be able to do that. So that's what I'm looking for, is that silhouette of a wing. I'm happy with the body shape. I'll make one or two more loose wraps behind, just so that I fill in all those spots underneath the wing. I'm not so concerned about up on top, and I'll go a couple more wraps right in front, and now I'm ready to form my head and tie this off. Now, I'm using 8/0 thread doing this, believe it or not. It's uni thread. I've gotten a feel for it so I can pull hard enough without breaking it. Wood finish. My head, I'll apply some cement later. I'm not going to do that right now. But if you have any little fibers hanging around, this is when you want to trim them. Now you got a beautiful silhouette of a fly here. A couple of my tail fibers got down into the vise. They didn't get chopped off. They're there. I have 3 on each side. I know you can't see it from this angle, but they are splayed out nicely. And now I'll take my Pantone pen or the Sharpie and color them the done color that I want. I should have done this before, but I didn't, so I can still do it now. And just by touching them, they'll take that done color. So, I hope you enjoyed this. They're one of my favorite flies to use. They're very durable, catch a ton of fish, and they last a good long time. So, I hope you learned something new, and I hope you choose to use it in the future when you tie your own.